In a quiet mountain community, nestled just northwest of the city, daily life rarely suggested danger. The atmosphere was marked by open-minded residents, a blend of free spirits and long-time locals who preferred the solitude and beauty of the hills to the chaos of urban living. Yet, beneath the calm, one tragedy would unfold, shocking the community and drawing in investigators who would need to rely not only on traditional policing, but on the intricacies of forensic science to discover the truth. The sequence began one Saturday morning when a distressed call reached emergency dispatch. The caller, a local neighbor, reported that a woman was unresponsive in her home, cold to the touch, and clearly beyond saving. His words were filled with alarm, but the details he gave were chilling. Lying nearby was the victim's young daughter, only 12 years old, who confirmed that the lifeless body belonged to her mother. The responding emergency team, though trained to revive those in distress, was confronted with a scene that bore unmistakable signs of death. With no pulse and a cold body, it was evident that intervention would be futile. Law enforcement was summoned, and upon arrival, investigators quickly noticed unusual details. The setting was an artist's studio, converted from a small garage. The modest space was cluttered with bottles, debris, and signs of disruption, suggesting an altercation. On the floor lay the victim, partly covered with a blanket, clothed only from the waist up, with obvious bruises and a smear of blood traced across her face and hair. To the experienced eye of investigators, the incongruence between the casual domestic setting and the signs of violence raised suspicions of a crime of sexual nature. The coroner, called to the scene, shared the same concerns. Forensic investigation always begins with what is seen before delving into what science can later reveal. Here, what was seen was troubling. The victim's state of undress, the multiple bruises, and the unnatural positioning of her body. Her daughter, observing the aftermath, offered her own perception that her mother never slept unclothed, making the situation even more suspicious. In forensic inquiry, small observations often prove to be of critical importance, and in this case, such details became vital in framing the scope of the investigation. The next step for detectives was to reconstruct the final hours of the woman's life. Interviews revealed that she had left her daughter with a trusted neighbor while she attended social gatherings in town. It was known she occasionally went to the local mercantile, a central hub where residents often met. That evening had been no different. Later, she returned briefly to speak with her daughter before heading into the studio. Witnesses confirmed she turned on the lights and lay down on the couch. That, tragically, would be the last time she was seen alive. Investigators sought to narrow down the window of death through examination of rigor mortis. They estimated she had been dead for 3 to 6 hours prior to discovery. Establishing this range allowed them to align timelines, compare witness statements, and isolate potential suspects. But to determine how she had died, an autopsy was indispensable. The forensic pathologist tasked with the case approached the examination with precision. The body was carefully documented, photographed, and subjected to a series of standardized procedures. Swabs were collected from the mouth, genitals, and areas where bruises suggested contact. Fingernail scrapings, pubic combings, and samples of bodily fluids were obtained to preserve transient evidence that could later link a perpetrator to the victim. The injuries were catalogued with meticulous attention. Linear bruises on the wrists suggested restraint. Bruising on the thighs suggested force. Distinct marks on the breasts resembled fingertip pressure. Most disturbing were the injuries to the neck, including deep bruising beneath the skin and tiny ruptures in the eyes consistent with strangulation. Each injury told a story, and collectively they painted a picture of a brutal sexual assault followed by homicide. Investigators began their inquiries close to home. The victim had been in a turbulent relationship with a man who quickly became the primary focus. Neighbors had long heard shouting from their residence and frequently observed her with unexplained bruises. Statements from the daughter revealed that she often stayed with the neighbor precisely because she felt unsafe in the home environment. Domestic violence is a well-established predictor of escalated aggression, and the man's history, combined with his reputation, made him the natural first suspect. When located and questioned, he was both distraught and defensive. He openly admitted to physical altercations with the victim, even describing an incident where he twisted her breasts in anger, and another where he placed his hands around her neck. These admissions coincided disturbingly with the injuries documented during autopsy. Yet, when his whereabouts on the night of the murder were examined, his alibi held firm. Multiple witnesses confirmed his presence elsewhere, corroborating his account that he had not been with the victim when she died. While his conduct was reprehensible and criminal in its own right, investigators faced the reality that he was not the killer they were searching for. Attention then shifted to another man in the community, the local fire chief, who had been seen with the victim on the night of her death. Witnesses recalled he had driven her home from a gathering and parked with her near the fire station. Initially, he claimed there had been nothing intimate between them. Under questioning, however, his story changed. He eventually admitted to fondling and kissing her breasts while they sat in his truck, an encounter he characterized as consensual. The inconsistencies in his testimony were troubling. DNA samples later confirmed his presence, matching traces found on the victim's body. But crucially, his explanation aligned with the forensic evidence. His DNA was located exactly where he said it would be, on her chest, and nowhere else. He, too, had no verifiable alibi during the hours when the murder occurred, leaving suspicion hanging over him, though insufficient to establish guilt. The focus eventually turned to another figure, a man whose reputation preceded him. Known within the town as an outcast, he carried the stigma of a prior conviction for sexual assault. Investigators learned that on the night in question, he had lingered in the vicinity, repeatedly driving past the area where the victim had been dropped off. He was seen by witnesses and mentioned by others, who noted that the victim herself had previously expressed distrust toward him. The suicide raised immediate questions. Was this a man consumed by guilt, unwilling to face another prison term? Or had investigators simply stumbled upon a convenient narrative, leaving them without a definitive resolution? Only science could answer that. The forensic laboratory processed the samples collected from the victim. Each swab and specimen was analyzed for genetic markers. Results began to filter in after weeks of painstaking analysis. The abusive boyfriend's DNA was confirmed on the victim, but as expected, due to their ongoing relationship, its presence was easily explained. The fire chief's DNA was also identified, limited to the chest area, consistent with his admission. Finally, the results from vaginal swabs revealed the critical evidence. Semen was present, and the genetic profile matched the man found dead in the woods. The implications were clear and inescapable. He had not only been present but had sexually assaulted the victim before her death. With this evidence, investigators reconstructed the final sequence. After being dropped off by the fire chief, the victim, heavily intoxicated, entered her studio. The lights remained on, visible from the neighbor's residence, until suddenly extinguished, a detail noted by her daughter. The assailant, having observed her movements, entered the studio under cover of night. He assaulted her violently, leaving telltale bruises and injuries. The intoxication rendered her defenseless, unable to resist effectively. In the end, he strangled her, ensuring silence and preventing survival. He then fled, returning to his home, where the weight of his crime and the certainty of capture compelled him to take his own life before police could apprehend him. Although the case was resolved through a combination of witness accounts, forensic pathology, and DNA analysis, it left a community scarred. The victim's daughter had not only lost her mother but had endured the trauma of witnessing her discovery. The abusive boyfriend was later charged with assault for the injuries he had inflicted during their volatile relationship, reinforcing the message that abuse, even when it falls short of murder, carries consequences. This case became emblematic of the power of forensic science. Without the DNA evidence, suspicion would have lingered on multiple suspects, and the truth may never have been known. Behavioral patterns, community rumors, and circumstantial evidence could only go so far. It was the scientific certainty of biological evidence that distinguished speculation from fact. Beyond the technicalities, the case illustrated the complex interplay between human behavior and violence. Domestic abuse, jealousy, addiction, and social dynamics all contributed layers of confusion, pointing in multiple directions. Each suspect carried motives and histories sufficient to warrant attention. Yet only science could cut through the ambiguity. The phrase repeated by investigators, "no science, no case," was proven once again. In the aftermath, those closest to the victim grappled with grief. Her friends recalled her spirit, her warmth, and the suddenness of her absence. For her daughter, the loss was profound. The child had been her protector, often watching over her, waiting up at night to ensure she returned safely. That protective instinct, remarkable for one so young, underscored the tragic inversion of roles that marked the victim's life. In reflecting upon the events, investigators noted the patterns so common in violent crime. A vulnerable woman, impaired by alcohol, living in a community where past offenders roamed, became the target of a predator. The crime itself was preventable only in a world where warning signs are heeded, where prior convictions lead to meaningful safeguards, and where communities are vigilant. But in reality, crimes of this nature occur not in idealized settings, but in messy, imperfect contexts where victims are often overlooked until it is too late. The conclusion of the case offered a degree of closure, but not resolution. Justice, in the legal sense, was incomplete, as the perpetrator's suicide denied the courts their chance to render judgment. Instead, the verdict came through science and through the logical process of elimination for the victim's family. This meant knowing the truth, but living with the frustration that accountability could not extend beyond the grave. Such cases highlight the dual role of forensic inquiry. It not only aids in identifying perpetrators, but also shields the innocent. Without DNA evidence, suspicion may have permanently stained the reputations of others. It is not uncommon in investigations for multiple individuals to appear guilty through circumstance, and only science can separate appearance from fact. In this case, it exonerated those whose actions were reprehensible but not homicidal, while unmasking the one individual whose crime was fatal. The legacy of the investigation extends beyond the immediate tragedy. It serves as a reminder of the importance of rigorous forensic practices, of the need to preserve evidence meticulously, and of the value of scientific expertise in the pursuit of justice. It also underscores the broader social issue of how communities address individuals with violent histories, and how those histories can foreshadow future harm. In the end, the community was left with silence where once there had been life. The studio where the crime occurred became a symbol of vulnerability and violation. The mountains, once serene, carried the memory of violence. For investigators, the case stood as a testament to their perseverance and to the indispensable role of forensic science. For the victim's daughter, it was the loss of a mother, the abrupt end of childhood innocence, and the beginning of a life shaped by resilience in the face of trauma. The story, though anchored in a single event, resonates more broadly. It speaks to the power of truth, the necessity of science, and the enduring quest for justice. Even when that justice arrives not in the courtroom, but in the quiet certainty of evidence. It speaks to the fragility of life, the cruelty of those who exploit weakness, and the determination of those who seek to hold them accountable. And it speaks to the enduring human capacity to endure, to rebuild, and to remember.